In 2023, Sarah Miller, a freelance photographer struggling with work stress and loneliness after breaking up with her boyfriend, decided to go on a solo hiking trip deep into the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington state. She hoped the tranquility of nature and the wild beauty of the place would help her find balance and regain her lost inspiration. Sarah was an introverted person, prone to overthinking, and sometimes her imagination painted rather gloomy scenarios. She began her journey on a crisp summer morning. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, creating dancing patches of light on the worn trail. The smell of damp earth, pine resin, and the delicate fragrance of wildflowers filled the air. The chirping of birds somewhere in the branches, the rustling of leaves under her feet created a melodious song of nature. Sarah carried a fairly heavy backpack. Inside were a tent, food, water, and of course, her beloved camera. She went deeper into the forest. The trail gradually narrowed, becoming more overgrown. Ancient trees with gnarled roots clinging to the soil and rocks like sleeping monsters. The light began to dim as she ventured further inside, giving way to mysterious shadows. At times, Sarah felt a vague sense of unease, as if someone was watching her from behind the dense bushes, but when she turned around, there was only the terrifying silence of the forest. She told herself she was probably just being too sensitive, her imagination playing tricks. The second day of the hike began with a different atmosphere. Dense fog enveloped the forest, making everything blurry, damp. Sunlight barely pierced through the opaque white mist, creating a mystical, somewhat eerie scene. The chirping of birds also seemed sparser, replaced by strange sounds echoing from deep within the forest. The cracking of branches, the rustling of dry leaves out of rhythm with the wind. Sarah felt the temperature around her suddenly drop, even though she was still moving constantly. A sudden chill ran down her spine. As she passed through a sparsely wooded area, Sarah suddenly noticed something strange. The stones along the trail seemed to have been disturbed. A few small rocks that had been lying still were now scattered on the path. She clearly remembered observing this area yesterday, and everything was in order. She tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps it was due to wild animals, but her intuition told her something was wrong. That evening, as Sarah set up her tent next to a small stream, she began to hear very faint noises. Only when she was completely silent could she hear them. It was a soft rustling sound as if someone was walking on dry leaves near the tent. She turned on her flashlight and shone it around, but saw nothing, only dense darkness and silent rows of trees. The feeling of being watched returned more strongly than ever, making it difficult for Sarah to fall asleep. She lay awake in her tent, listening to every little sound of the forest. On the third day, the fog had thinned out, but the forest still had an indescribable gloomy air. Sarah felt loneliness engulfing her. Not just physical loneliness but also a heavy spiritual loneliness. She began to doubt her decision to hike alone so deep into the forest. While crossing a small ravine, Sarah suddenly saw a dark shadow flit by out of the corner of her left eye. It moved very quickly, disappearing behind the dense trees before she could make out what it was. The shadow was tall, slender, and seemed to move very lightly, without making any noise. Sarah's heart pounded. She stopped walking, trying to look closely at where the shadow had just disappeared, but only saw gnarled tree trunks and dark bushes. She wondered if it was a large animal like a deer or a bear, but its shape didn't seem like that. It had the form of a person, but moved too fast and too silently. All that day, Sarah felt uneasy. She kept looking back over her shoulder, feeling as if someone was following her, watching her every step. In the evening, as she sat by a small fire, trying to ward off the cold of the night and the fear gnawing at her mind, she heard strange noises again. This time, it wasn't just rustling anymore, but also very soft whispers, as if someone was saying something in her ear, but she couldn't make out what it was. On the fourth day, the forest became eerily silent. The chirping of birds had completely disappeared. Only a heavy silence remained, so heavy that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her chest. The feeling of being watched did not disappear at all, but seemed to become stronger. Sarah began to feel as if someone was standing right behind her, just a few steps away. She could sense the presence of someone, something invisible but utterly terrifying. While walking along a dry stream bed, Sarah suddenly heard someone call her name. Sarah. The call was soft, carrying a sorrowful tone, echoing through the quiet space of the forest. Sarah startled and turned around quickly, looking around, but saw no one. She was sure she had heard it. Not the whistling of the wind or an echo, but a clear voice, albeit very soft. She tried to reassure herself. Perhaps she was just too stressed and tired and had misheard. But just a few minutes later, she heard the call again, this time clearer, closer, as if it was ringing right in her ear. Sarah, help me. The voice sounded weak, full of pain. Real fear began to invade Sarah's mind. She was no longer sure that what she was experiencing was just a hallucination. While trying to find a safe place to spend the night, Sarah stumbled upon an old, dilapidated shack, hidden deep in a thicket of bushes. The shack had partially collapsed. The thatched roof was rotten, but some old furniture still remained inside. Sarah cautiously stepped inside. She saw a rickety wooden bed, a small table covered in dust, and a few old books scattered on the floor. While examining the books, Sarah found a small diary, its leather cover worn out. She opened it and began to read. The handwritten lines had faded with time, telling the story of a woman named Eliza Carter, who had lived in this shack in the late 19th century. Eliza had moved to this forest with her husband to seek a peaceful life, but a tragedy had occurred. Eliza's husband had died in a logging accident, leaving her alone in the remote shack. The subsequent diary pages were filled with Eliza's loneliness, despair, and extreme suffering. She wrote about strange sounds she heard at night, the feeling of being watched, and strange dreams about a shadowy figure lurking around the shack. The last page of the diary contained only a single trembling line. "I can't bear it anymore. They're coming," and then abruptly ended. Sarah shuddered, feeling a strange connection between what Eliza had experienced and what she was facing. Could the dark shadow and the whispers she heard be related to Eliza? That night, Sarah decided to sleep in the abandoned shack. She felt a strange urge, as if Eliza wanted her to know something. Sarah lit a small candle, its faint light flickering in the damp space. She held Eliza's diary tightly to her chest, trying to dispel the fear that was engulfing her. As night fell deeper, the strange sounds began to appear again. The wind whistling through the cracks of the shack sounded like mournful cries. The branches rubbing against each other created chilling sounds. Then, Sarah heard the whispers calling her name again, this time no longer faint, but clearer, more haunting. "Sarah. She wants you." A cold voice echoed from all directions, as if surrounding her. Suddenly, the candle flickered violently and went out. Dense darkness enveloped the shack. Sarah felt a chilling coldness rush in. A freezing hand touched her shoulder. She screamed in horror, trying to struggle in the dark. She sensed the presence of someone, something invisible but very powerful, trying to pull her out of the shack. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, praying desperately. She saw in her mind's eye the image of Eliza. Her face pale, her eyes blankly staring at her in the darkness. The next morning, Sarah woke up on the cold ground outside the shack. She didn't clearly remember what had happened the night before. Only the terrifying feeling and extreme exhaustion remained. The shack was still there, dilapidated and silent, as if nothing had happened. But Sarah knew. She had faced something terrifying, a spirit trapped in this forest. She quickly gathered her belongings, leaving the shack and that haunted area. She walked non-stop until she saw sunlight and signs of civilization. Returning home, Sarah was no longer the same person. The terrifying hiking trip had left a deep psychological scar on her. She often had nightmares about Eliza and the cold whispers in the night. She could never forget the feeling of being watched, being haunted in that deep forest. Sarah told her story to the locals, but most thought she was just hallucinating due to stress and fatigue. However, a few older people had heard similar stories about Eliza Carter and the abandoned shack in the woods. They said that Eliza's spirit still lingered there, seeking help or someone to unburden her suffering. Sarah never returned to the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. The fear and haunting memory always stayed with her, reminding her of what had happened, and the terrifying mysteries that still lie hidden in those wild forests. Would you, those of you listening to this story, dare to venture alone into such forests? Share your feelings in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true scary horror stories. In 2024, after a tumultuous year filled with work stress and financial pressures, Ethan Carter, a young software engineer, decided to embark on a 5-day solo hiking trip through the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex in Montana, with his 3 close friends, Liam, Chloe, and Noah. Ethan was quite sensitive, prone to excessive worrying, and he hoped this trip would help him escape negative thoughts and find inner peace. Liam was a strong, adventurous guy. Chloe was a smart, practical medical student, and Noah was a calm person, always maintaining composure in any situation. The first day, the weather was wonderful. Bright golden sunlight filtered through the towering pine trees, illuminating the needle-covered trail. The distinct scent of pine resin filled the air, creating a fresh and pleasant atmosphere. The gurgling of the stream, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves under their feet created a beautiful natural symphony. They laughed, chatted lively, telling each other old adventure stories. Ethan's stress and anxiety seemed to melt away into the fresh mountain air. They set up camp by a small stream, gazing at the twinkling stars in the velvety black sky. Liam told jokes, Chloe made witty remarks, and Noah played the guitar softly. Everything was perfect. On the second day, the atmosphere began to change. A thin layer of mist covered the forest in the early morning, making everything hazy and more mystical. The trail gradually became less distinct, with gnarled, moss-covered ancient trees appearing like giant ghosts. Ethan began to feel a vague sense of unease. He often felt like he was being watched, as if someone was lurking in the dense bushes, observing the group's every step. He tried to dismiss the thought, telling himself it was just his imagination. When they stopped to rest, Noah discovered something strange. A few small stones scattered on the trail seemed to have been disturbed, not in the same position as when they passed yesterday. Liam and Chloe initially didn't notice, but when Noah pointed out the unusual marks, they also began to feel that something was off. That evening, as the group gathered around the campfire, Ethan heard very faint noises, a rustling sound as if someone was moving on dry leaves, very close to their tents. He turned on his flashlight, shining it directly towards the sound, but saw nothing. Only dense darkness and silent rows of trees. Liam and Noah also heard it, but they thought it was wild animals. Only Chloe, she seemed a little more worried. Ethan had trouble sleeping that night. The feeling of being watched kept overwhelming him, preventing him from getting any sleep. He lay motionless in his sleeping bag, listening to every tiny sound of the forest, his heart pounding in his chest. On the third day of the trip, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The fog still lingered, limiting visibility. Strange sounds in the forest also became more frequent. The cracking of branches, the wind whistling through rock crevices sounding like sighs. Ethan constantly saw dark shadows flitting by out of the corner of his eye, so fast that he couldn't make out what they were. Sometimes, he swore he saw a tall, slender figure appearing and disappearing among the trees, but when he turned his head, it vanished. In one moment, as Ethan was walking behind the group, he suddenly felt a chilling touch on the back of his neck. He flinched and turned around abruptly, but no one was there. He asked Liam and Noah if they had touched him. They both shook their heads, looking at him puzzled. Chloe looked at Ethan with a worried expression. She said she also felt something wasn't right, but wasn't sure what it was. That evening, when they had set up camp, Ethan heard whispers again. This time, it wasn't just rustling, but also very faint sounds, like muffled crying, weak moans. He told Liam, Chloe, and Noah about what he had heard and seen, but they all thought he was just too tired and worried. Liam reassured him that it was just his imagination, but Ethan knew he wasn't imagining it. Fear began to eat away at his mind, preventing him from getting any sleep. On the fourth day, the forest became eerily dark and silent. The chirping of birds had completely disappeared, leaving only a terrifying silence. The entire group felt an invisible pressure surrounding them. They walked in silence, no one speaking to anyone. The light piercing through the canopy was also weaker, making it feel as if the sky was always overcast, about to rain. As they were crossing a deep valley, Ethan suddenly heard someone call his name. Ethan. The call was faint, cold, like a chilling gust of wind blowing through his ear. Ethan froze, turning his head to look everywhere, but saw no one. Liam, Chloe, and Noah also stopped, looking at Ethan with puzzled expressions. What's wrong, Ethan? Chloe asked, her voice sounding worried. I heard someone call my name, Ethan said, his voice trembling. Liam tried to reassure him. It's probably just an echo. Ethan, you're tired. But Ethan knew it wasn't an echo. He felt a very close, very clear presence, right beside them. Just a few minutes later, the call echoed again. This time clearer, closer, as if it was ringing right in Ethan's ear. Ethan, find me. The voice was weak, but full of haunting dread. Noah and Chloe also heard the call, their faces turning pale. Liam also couldn't maintain his composure anymore. The group looked at each other in silence, extreme fear clearly visible on each person's face. They knew they were not alone in this forest. In a state of panic, the group tried to move faster, searching for a safe place to take shelter. After some searching, they stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, hidden among thorny bushes. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for a very long time. The thatched roof had collapsed, the wooden walls were rotting. Nevertheless, they decided to go inside to escape the cold and the haunting feeling that was engulfing them. Inside the cabin, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. A rickety wooden table, overturned chairs, and a fireplace that had long been cold. While Liam was trying to start a fire, Chloe accidentally touched an old wooden box under the bed. She opened it. Inside was a yellow diary and a few old photographs. Noah picked up the diary and began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Abigail Thorne, who had lived in this cabin in the 1930s. Abigail had moved here with her husband, a gold miner, to seek their fortune. But soon after, her husband mysteriously disappeared in the forest, leaving no trace. Abigail lived alone in the cabin, waiting for her husband to return. The subsequent diary pages were filled with her loneliness, despair, and haunting obsession. Abigail wrote about strange sounds in the forest, dark shadows flitting past the windows, and horrifying dreams of her husband being pulled away by an invisible force. The last page of the diary contained only a single trembling line. "He's back, but it's not him anymore, they're watching me. I have to hide," and then abruptly ended. The group looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. Abigail's haunting seemed to still linger in this cabin. That night, the group decided to stay in the cabin, as it was too dark and dangerous to move. They built a large fire, trying to ward off the cold and the fear that was engulfing them. Ethan clutched Abigail's diary tightly, feeling a strange connection to the unfortunate woman. He knew Abigail's spirit was still here, and she wanted them to know the truth. As night deepened, the strange sounds in the cabin began to become clearer. Agonizing moans from the corner of the room, sounds of breaking objects, heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. Liam and Noah tried to calm each other, but their faces were pale. Chloe sat huddled in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. Then, a tall, shadowy figure, its form indistinct, appeared in the corner of the room. It had no clear face, just a dark mass, but the whole group felt a chilling coldness radiating from it. Ethan felt as if someone was choking him, making it extremely difficult to breathe. He saw an image of a man, his face full of pain and anger, being dragged away by that shadow deep into the forest. It was Abigail's husband, killed by a supernatural force, and Abigail had witnessed it all. Ethan believed that Abigail had gone insane from overwhelming fear and loneliness, and her spirit was still here, trapped between two worlds, unable to pass on. That shadow was what killed her husband, and now, it was trying to attack them. The next morning, the group woke up exhausted and in extreme panic. The cabin was still there, dilapidated and silent, but the horror of the previous night was still deeply imprinted in their minds. They quickly left the cabin, running non-stop through the forest, not daring to look back. Finally, they escaped the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. Upon returning home, their lives were no longer the same. Ethan was the most affected. He constantly had nightmares about Abigail and the terrifying shadow in the forest. He couldn't sleep at night, always feeling watched, haunted. Liam and Chloe were also psychologically traumatized. Noah, who was usually the calmest, also became quieter and less talkative. They told their story to their relatives and friends, but most didn't believe them, thinking it was just hallucinations due to stress and lack of sleep. However, some older locals had heard similar stories about mysterious disappearances in the Bob Marshall forest. They said that the forest had a dark history, cursed by an ancient force, always hunting down adventurers who wandered into its territory. Ethan and his friends never dared to return to that forest again. The fear and haunting memory always stayed with them, reminding them of that horrifying night, and the gruesome mysteries that still lie hidden deep within the wild forests of Montana. Would you, those of you listening to this story, be brave enough to go hiking alone through such secluded forests? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true scary horror stories. In 2025, Olivia Reed, a young botanist with a hidden obsession about her older sister's death in an unexplained accident years ago, joined an expedition of 5 people, led by Professor Martin Hayes, a renowned but somewhat eccentric botanist. The purpose of the trip was to explore a little-known primary forest in the Cascade Mountains, Oregon, where rare and previously unrecorded plant species were believed to exist. Olivia always felt sensitive, easily vulnerable, and she hoped this trip would help her escape the haunting thoughts of the past. The expedition began its journey on a crisp autumn morning. The weak sunlight of October filtered through the towering conifers, casting faint streaks of light on the damp ground. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of moss, damp earth, and a faint pine aroma. The rustling of the wind through the leaves, the distant chirping of birds, created a serene symphony of the deep forest. The group eagerly walked, their laughter and conversations echoing through the vast space. Professor Hayes led the way, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a scientist passionate about discovery. Olivia walked behind, trying to capture every detail of the forest with her camera. However, from the very first steps deep into the forest, she felt an indescribable coldness, a vague sense of unease creeping into her mind. The forest seemed to be whispering secrets, stories that only those brave enough could hear. At times, Olivia felt as if someone was watching them from behind the ancient tree trunks. But when she turned around, there was only the terrifying silence of the vast forest. She told herself it was just her imagination being stimulated by the gloomy atmosphere of the deep forest. On the second day, the expedition went deeper into the forest, where sunlight could barely penetrate. Everything became darker and wetter. Ancient trees with massive, moss-covered trunks stood majestically like giant guardians of the forest. The air became heavy, carrying a strange scent, a faint hint of carrion flower mixed with old musty dampness. The chirping of birds had completely disappeared, replaced by strange sounds. The cracking of dry branches, the rustling of leaves out of sync with the wind, and sometimes, faint moans echoing from afar. At noon, when the group stopped by a small stream, Olivia discovered something disturbing. There were strange symbols carved into the tree trunks. They were not typical hiker's marks, but bizarre drawings, resembling distorted faces. She pointed them out to Professor Hayes, but he just waved his hand, assuming they were carved by mischievous climbers. However, Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. In the evening, when they set up their tents and lit a campfire, the strange phenomena began to appear more clearly. Liam, one of the expedition members, said he heard faint sounds of children crying somewhere near his tent. Emily, another member, also said she felt the temperature inside her tent suddenly drop, becoming chillingly cold even though they had a campfire. As for Olivia, she repeatedly had strange dreams of a woman with long hair, a pale face, and hollow eyes, standing and staring at her from a distance. She woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. The feeling of being watched, being observed kept overwhelming her, preventing her from getting any sleep. On the third day, the forest became even more gloomy and terrifying. Dense fog covered everything, reducing visibility to only a few meters. The expedition had to move slowly, groping their way forward. The air was heavy, carrying an eerie silence. Only the sound of their footsteps and the dripping of mist from the trees. Olivia felt a bone-chilling cold envelop her, even though she was wearing several layers of clothing. As the group was passing through a deep valley, where the fog was as thick as a wall, Emily suddenly screamed, "Someone's there! I saw someone over there!" The entire group stopped, looking in the direction Emily pointed. In the blurry mist, they saw a faint, tall, dark figure, standing silently among the trees. The shadow appeared to be a woman, with long, flowing hair, but her face was indistinct. It stood there, motionless, like a statue. Professor Hayes tried to reassure everyone. "Don't worry, it might be a lost hiker." But when Professor Hayes called out, "Hello, are you okay?" the shadow suddenly vanished into the mist, leaving no trace. Liam and Noah, who were usually strong, also began to feel scared. As for Olivia, she felt an extreme sense of dread. She was sure it was the woman from her dreams. For the rest of the day, the entire group moved with tension and fear. Every small sound in the forest made them jump. That evening, when they set up their tents, Olivia and Emily both heard whispers, faint moans, and muffled crying coming from deep within the forest. They told Professor Hayes, but he still tried to explain it with scientific reasons. However, his eyes also showed clear signs of worry. On the fourth day, fear had engulfed the entire expedition. No one was talking cheerfully anymore. Everyone walked in silence, their eyes cautiously looking around. The forest also seemed to come alive, with strange sounds and images constantly appearing. Emily continuously saw dark shadows flitting by out of the corner of her eye, and Noah claimed he saw leaves falling on their own, even though there was no wind. Olivia was the most affected. She couldn't get any sleep at night. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of the woman with a pale face and hollow eyes appeared clearly in her mind. Whispers, muffled crying kept echoing in her ears. Sometimes, she felt as if someone was touching her, a chillingly cold, eerie touch. She cried helplessly, feeling utterly powerless against this haunting. That morning, as the group was having breakfast, Liam suddenly saw something horrifying. On a nearby tree trunk, there were deep claw marks, shaped like human fingernails. They were not animal claw marks, but rather angry scratches, as if someone had desperately tried to claw at the tree in extreme agony. The group looked at each other. No one spoke a word. Professor Hayes also couldn't find any reasonable explanation anymore. He began to believe that something was truly wrong in this forest. In a state of panic, the group decided to change their route, trying to get out of this terrifying forest as quickly as possible. They followed an old, less traveled trail, hoping to find their way out. After many hours of walking in extreme tension, they discovered a small, desolate graveyard, hidden deep in the forest. The old stone graves, covered in moss, had no names, only strange symbols carved on them. A cold, gloomy feeling enveloped the graveyard, sending shivers down everyone's spine. While examining the graves, Olivia discovered something disturbing. Under a large ancient tree, there was an old, dilapidated diary, yellowed with time. She carefully opened it and began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Isabella Monroe, who lived in the 1800s. Isabella and her family had settled in this forest, trying to build a new life. But soon after, a strange epidemic had broken out, claiming the lives of everyone in her family, leaving only Isabella. The subsequent diary pages were filled with her loneliness, despair, and haunting obsession. Isabella wrote about the spirits of her family, lingering in the forest, calling her name at night. She believed that those spirits could not rest in peace because they had been buried in an unholy place. The last page of the diary read simply, "I will stay here, with them, forever, until they find peace. I will be the guardian, and I will not let anyone harm them," and then abruptly ended. The group looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. They understood that the spirits of Isabella and her family were still here, and they were the spirits they had been feeling for the past few days. That night, the group decided to camp right near the graveyard. They felt a strange urge, as if Isabella wanted their help. They built a large fire, trying to ward off the cold and the pervasive fear. Olivia clutched Isabella's diary to her chest. She believed she had found the reason for the strange phenomena they were experiencing. As night deepened, the graveyard came alive in a terrifying way. The wind whistling through the tombstones sounded like whispers, the rustling of leaves like hurried footsteps. Then, they heard muffled crying, agonizing moans, and their names being called from all directions. Liam and Noah tried to calm each other, but they too began to see shadowy figures flitting among the graves. Chloe huddled in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably. Olivia stood up, holding Isabella's diary. She walked towards the graves. Professor Hayes tried to stop her, but she didn't listen. Olivia looked directly into the void, saying, "Isabella, I understand your pain. I will help you and your family find peace. Tell me what you need." Immediately, a chilling gust of wind suddenly swept through, scattering everything. The surrounding trees swayed violently. A shadowy figure of a woman, with long hair, a pale face, and hollow eyes, appeared right in front of Olivia. It was Isabella. She said nothing, only reached out her hand to Olivia, a bony, freezing hand. Olivia wasn't afraid. She took Isabella's hand. In that instant, Olivia saw a memory, a vivid image. She saw Isabella and her family, slowly dying from the epidemic, with no one to help them. They died in pain, loneliness, and their souls were trapped here, unable to rest in peace. Isabella was the last to die, and she had witnessed the deaths of all her loved ones. That pain and obsession had bound her soul to this forest. The next morning, the group woke up exhausted and in extreme panic. The graveyard was still there, silent, but the chilling feeling of the previous night still haunted them. Olivia clutched Isabella's diary. She knew what she had to do. She told the whole story to Professor Hayes and the rest of the group. Professor Hayes, despite being a scientist, could not deny what they had experienced. They decided not to continue the expedition, but instead, they would perform a simple ritual to help the spirits of Isabella and her family find peace. They dug a new grave, placed all the remaining personal belongings of Isabella's family in it, and prayed for them. When they completed the ritual, a gentle breeze swept through the graveyard, carrying a strange sense of peace. The spirits of Isabella and her family seemed to have been freed. However, that terrifying journey left a deep psychological scar on Olivia. She frequently had nightmares about Isabella and the calls from the forest. She couldn't sleep soundly, always feeling haunted by what had happened. Her friends were also traumatized. They had experienced something beyond human comprehension. Olivia never returned to that forest again. The fear and haunting memory always stayed with her, reminding her of the terrifying mysteries that still lie hidden deep within the wild forests of Oregon. Do trapped spirits truly exist? And is there anyone out there, listening to these stories, and wondering if they might be the next victims of the paranormal? Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. In 2023, two adventurous young men, Alex Stone and Mark Jensen, along with a small group of 3 young geology researchers, decided to embark on a challenging 5-day hiking trip deep into the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. Alex was a former military man, constantly haunted by strange noises from his time in combat, which sometimes made him overly stressed. Mark, on the other hand, was an amateur historian, always drawn to mysterious stories and local legends. On the first morning of the trip, the sun shone brightly through the canopy, casting golden streaks of light on the moss-covered trail. The scent of damp earth, pine resin, and the fragrance of wildflowers lingered in the air. The chirping of birds, the gurgling of the stream, and the rustling of leaves under their feet created a peaceful symphony of nature. The group laughed and chatted animatedly, sharing their promising exploration plans. They all carried heavy backpacks, filled with camping gear and research equipment. However, as they began to delve deeper into the forest, the atmosphere gradually changed. The trees became denser, the light dimmer, and towering ancient trees, covered in thick moss, stood majestically like ancient stone pillars. A vague coldness began to creep into Alex's mind. He felt an indescribable unease, as if someone was watching them from behind the dense foliage. Mark also sensed that something was amiss. He continuously looked around, his eyes scrutinizing the deep shadows of the forest. Nevertheless, the group told themselves it was just fatigue and an overactive imagination. On the second day, the forest became much gloomier. Thick fog covered everything, severely limiting visibility. The towering trees turned into blurry ghosts in the opaque white mist. The air became damp and heavy, carrying a strange scent, a faint smell of decaying earth and something akin to rusty metal. The chirping of birds had completely disappeared, replaced by strange sounds. The cracking of branches, the unusual rustling of dry leaves, as if someone was constantly walking. At noon, when the group stopped to rest by a small stream, one of the young researchers named Chloe, who was often anxious, discovered something terrifying. There were small, ragged fabric doll-like objects, hanging from tree branches at the edge of the stream. They were made from old pieces of cloth, their eyes stitched with red thread, staring blankly at them. Chloe flinched backward, her face pale. Mark moved closer to examine them. He realized the dolls seemed to have been there for a very long time, saturated with the forest's dampness. That evening, when they set up their tents and lit a campfire, the strange phenomena began to become more apparent. Alex heard faint whispers from deep within the forest, as if someone was calling his name, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. Mark recounted that he saw dark shadows flitting by out of the corner of his eye while he was gathering firewood. As for Chloe, she couldn't get any sleep. She continuously heard faint sounds of children crying and weak moans echoing from afar. She clutched her blanket tightly, trembling uncontrollably. That whole night, the feeling of being watched kept overwhelming them, preventing anyone in the group from sleeping soundly. On the third day, the entire group felt tired and anxious. The fog still lingered, making the forest gloomier and scarier than ever. Strange sounds continuously echoed, the wind whistling through rock crevices like wails. Dry branches rubbing against each other creating horrifying noises. The group moved in silence, their eyes cautiously looking around. Around 2 a.m. that night, a horrifying event occurred. Alex woke up to a chilling coldness and a faint sound from outside his tent. He carefully pulled back the flap and looked out. In the pitch-black night, where moonlight couldn't penetrate, he saw a tall, shadowy figure, its form indistinct, standing a few meters from their tent. That shadow was not a tree or a rock. It had a human-like shape, but it was large and blurry. And then, Alex saw them. a pair of fiery red eyes like glowing embers, shining in the darkness, staring directly at their tent. Those eyes were not from a wild animal. They contained a hatred and bone-chilling coldness. Alex froze in fear. He couldn't scream, nor could he move. He watched the shadows slowly move, its red eyes still fixed on their tent, then gradually blend into the night, disappearing without a trace. That morning, Alex told Mark and Chloe about what he had seen. At first, Mark tried to explain it as an illusion due to low light and fatigue, but his face also showed clear signs of fear. Chloe fully believed Alex's words, because she had also heard strange noises throughout the night. From that moment on, fear had completely engulfed the entire group. They knew they were not alone in this forest, and whatever was watching them was not human. On the fourth day, fear had become an indispensable part of their journey. No one chatted idly anymore. Everyone moved in heavy silence, their eyes constantly scanning for strange figures. The forest also seemed to come alive, with terrifying sounds and images continuously appearing. Chloe repeatedly saw blurry shadows flitting by out of the corner of her eye, and sometimes she swore she heard someone calling her name in a cold voice. That evening, when they had set up camp, Alex was trying to start a fire. He suddenly felt a chilling gaze staring at him. He looked up, towards the dense trees, and once again, he saw those fiery red eyes, peering out from among the dark foliage. Those eyes were still there, staring directly at him, unblinking, like hellfire. Alex felt a chilling gust of cold air rush over him, making him shiver. He quickly called Mark and Chloe, but when they looked up, the red eyes had disappeared, leaving only the dense darkness of the forest. Alex and Chloe couldn't sleep that night. They lay awake in their tent, listening to every little sound. Every gust of wind made them jump. The feeling of being watched, being observed kept overwhelming them, preventing them from getting any sleep. Fatigue and fear had begun to seriously affect their mental state. In a state of panic and despair, the group decided to abandon their initial research goals, trying to find a way out of this terrifying forest as quickly as possible. They followed an old, less traveled trail, hoping to find a way out. After many hours of walking in extreme tension, they discovered an old, unmarked grave, hidden deep within a dense part of the forest. The grave was marked by a large stone, with strange symbols carved on it that had faded over time. As Mark was examining the grave, he discovered a small, rusty iron box, buried under a nearby tree stump. He carefully opened it. Inside were a yellow diary and an old silver necklace. Chloe picked up the diary and began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Alara Thorne, who lived in this area in the late 19th, early 20th century. Alara was a reclusive woman, shunned by the locals who believed she was a witch. She was accused of causing a strange epidemic that had claimed the lives of many villagers. The subsequent diary pages were filled with Alara's loneliness, injustice, and intense anger. She wrote about the voices she heard in the forest, mysterious figures appearing at night, and the curse she swore to inflict upon those who had wronged her. The last page of the diary contained only a single trembling line. "They will pay, all will pay. My soul will not rest until I find justice," and then abruptly ended. The group looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. Alara's haunting seemed to still linger in this forest, and perhaps, the red eyes Alex had seen belonged to her. That night, the group decided to set up camp right near Alara's grave. They felt a strange urge, as if Alara wanted them to know the truth. They built a large fire, trying to ward off the cold and the pervasive fear. Alex clutched Alara's diary to his chest. He knew. Her spirit was still here, and she was seeking release. As night deepened, the area around the grave came alive in a terrifying way. The wind whistling through the tombstones sounded like whispers, the cracking of branches like bones clattering together. Then, they heard muffled crying, agonizing moans, and their names being called from all directions. Their tents began to shake violently. Belongings inside were thrown around. Alex and Mark tried to calm themselves, but they also began to see blurry figures flitting among the trees. Chloe huddled in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably. Then, precisely at 2 a.m., a tall, shadowy figure, its form indistinct, appeared right in front of them, not far away. And this time, those fiery red eyes were no longer lurking, but shone directly at them, full of hatred and pain. It was Alara, the trapped spirit. Alex felt a chilling gust of cold air rush over him, making him shiver. He saw a fleeting image in his mind, a scene of Alara being chased by villagers, stoned, burned alive. She died in pain, despair, and utter resentment. Her soul was bound to this forest, unable to rest in peace. She wanted revenge. Revenge on those who had harmed her. And now, she was seeking her next victims. Alex screamed, "We are not your enemies. Alara, we came to help you." The shadow paused for a moment, its red eyes flickering. Then, another cold gust of wind swept through, so strong it almost knocked them over. The shadow slowly dissolved into the night, leaving only a chilling and haunting atmosphere lingering around them. The next morning, the group woke up exhausted and in extreme panic. The forest was still there, silent, but the horror of the previous night still haunted them. Alex and Mark decided they had to leave this forest immediately. They quickly packed their belongings, running non-stop through the trails, not daring to look back. Finally, they escaped the Olympic National Forest. Upon returning home, their lives were no longer the same. Alex was the most affected. He frequently had nightmares about Alara and the fiery red eyes. He couldn't sleep soundly, always feeling watched, haunted. Mark was also psychologically traumatized. He became quiet and withdrawn. Chloe always lived in fear, not daring to go out alone at night. They told their story to their relatives and friends, but most didn't believe them, thinking it was just hallucinations due to stress and lack of sleep. However, some older locals had heard similar stories about mysterious disappearances and strange phenomena in the Olympic forest. They said that the forest had a dark history, cursed by an ancient force, always hunting down adventurers who wandered into its territory. Alex and his friends never dared to return to that forest again. The fear and haunting memory always stayed with them, reminding them of that terrifying night, and the gruesome mysteries that still lie hidden deep within the wild forests of Washington. Would you, those of you listening to this story, be brave enough to go hiking alone through such secluded forests? Or will you fall asleep with the image of a dark spirit and red eyes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true scary horror stories. In 2020, Evelyn Hayes, a middle-aged single woman with a strange passion for exploring wild nature, especially mysterious and untouched forests, signed up for a local expedition into the Hoh National Forest in Washington state. Evelyn had just gone through a difficult period in her life, losing her best friend to a terminal illness, and she hoped the harshness of nature and the wild beauty of the forest would help ease her sorrow. She was inherently a strong, independent woman, but deep down harbored vague anxieties and fears about the unknown. The expedition consisted of 6 people, led by a local man named Ben Carter, an experienced woodsman familiar with the area. They began their journey on a misty early morning. Sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick fog, casting pale streaks of light on the damp trail. The smell of wet earth, moss, and the strong fragrance of conifers filled the air. The sound of water flowing from hidden streams in the deep forest, the chirping of birds somewhere in the towering branches, created a peaceful yet mysterious scene. Evelyn walked alongside the others, feeling each heavy step on the slippery trail. The surrounding trees were tall and so dense that daylight barely penetrated, creating a dark and damp space. Ancient trees covered in thick green moss, with gnarled branches reaching out like ghostly arms, gave the forest an ancient and eerie appearance. Ben warned the group that they were entering an area with many strange stories told by the locals, a place many believed to be haunted. Evelyn initially didn't put much faith in such outlandish tales, but a vague sense of unease had clung to her since setting foot in this forest. On the second day, the expedition ventured deeper into the core of the forest, where sunlight had almost completely disappeared. Everything was shrouded in gloomy darkness, with only their flashlights illuminating the way. The air became colder and damper, carrying an unpleasant odor, like old decaying leaves mixed with a fishy smell. The chirping of birds had completely ceased, replaced by strange sounds echoing in the darkness, the cracking of dry branches under their feet, the wind whistling through rock crevices sounding like mournful cries, and sometimes, very faint noises, like soft footsteps on the dry leaves nearby. That evening, as the group set up camp beside a small, swift stream, strange occurrences began to happen more frequently. A member of the group named David, a playful young man, recounted that he had heard someone whispering his name while he was fetching water, but when he turned around he saw no one. Sarah, another girl in the group, also said she felt like someone was watching her from behind whenever she walked alone. As for Evelyn, she continuously heard small noises in the late night, the rattling of objects as if someone was moving them, even though they had made sure everything was neatly arranged before going to bed. The climax was around 2 a.m. When everyone was trying to doze off, they were startled by loud noises as if someone was roughly rummaging through their belongings. Ben and David quickly turned on their flashlights, rushed out of their tents to check, but found no traces of humans or large animals. Their belongings were scattered everywhere. Backpacks were wide open, food and water were spilled all over the place. The whole group felt bewildered and scared. No one could explain what was happening. Evelyn lay in her tent, her heart pounding, a sense of unease and fear rising intensely. On the third day, fear had begun to creep into the minds of every member of the group. No one dared to walk alone anymore. Everyone tried to stay close to each other, their eyes cautiously scanning every nook and cranny of the forest. The atmosphere became tense and heavy. Strange sounds continued to occur. Soft but distinct footsteps echoed somewhere near them, even though they were standing still. The unexplained cracking of branches, and sometimes, eerie cries echoing from afar, like the howl of some strange creature. While the group was moving through a densely wooded area, Evelyn suddenly saw a dark shadow flit by in the corner of her right eye. It moved very quickly, disappearing behind the large trees before she could make out what it was. The shadow was tall, slender, and seemed to move very lightly, without making any noise. Evelyn stopped walking, her heart pounding, trying to look closely at where the shadow had just disappeared, but only saw gnarled tree trunks and dark bushes. She told Ben and the others, but they assumed she was just hallucinating due to fatigue. However, A look of doubt was evident in Ben's eyes. That evening, when they set up camp in a relatively large clearing, the strange phenomena continued. Sarah recounted that she had seen a faint shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, staring at them. But when she blinked, the figure vanished. David again heard someone sighing very close to his tent. As for Evelyn, she felt as if someone was standing right behind her, even though she was sitting leaning against a large tree trunk. She shivered, trying to turn her head, but saw nothing, only the encompassing darkness and the sound of wind blowing gently through the leaves. The feeling of being watched became increasingly clear, making Evelyn feel extremely uneasy. The third night in the forest became a horrifying one for Evelyn. She couldn't fall asleep at all. Every time she closed her eyes, strange images flashed through her mind. Shadows lurking among the trees, fiery red eyes staring at her from the darkness. She repeatedly dreamed of being lost in an endless forest, surrounded by eerie sounds and ghostly figures. In her dreams, she always felt a sinister presence lurking, wanting to drag her down into the abyss. She woke up several times during the night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. Every slightest sound from outside the tent made her jump in fright. The sound of falling leaves, breaking branches, even the chirping of insects made her feel like something sinister was approaching. Evelyn tried to reassure herself, telling herself it was just because she was too stressed and tired after the strenuous days of hiking. But deep down, she knew something was wrong in this forest. Fear kept growing in her heart, making her feel like she was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The next morning, Evelyn looked haggard and visibly tired. Her eyes were dark circles from lack of sleep. The others in the group were not much better off. Everyone wore worried and tense expressions. On the fourth day, the whole group decided to change their route, trying to follow a different trail that Ben vaguely remembered passing through before, hoping it would lead them out of this sinister area. They walked in silence, each step heavy, fear still lingering over them. While passing through an area with many large moss-covered rocks, Sarah accidentally tripped over something at her feet. It was a small wooden box, old and rotting. Ben carefully picked up the box, brushing off the dirt that clung to its surface. When opened, inside was a yellow diary, the thin pages as if they were about to disintegrate, and a few faded black and white photographs. Mark, who was always curious about local history, carefully turned each page of the diary, trying to read the faded handwritten lines. The diary belonged to a woman named Alara Mason, who had lived in this area in the late 19th century. Alara was a nature-loving woman, often venturing deep into the forest to explore and record the wonders of the plant world. However, the subsequent diary pages told of her sinister experiences. Alara wrote about strange sounds she heard in the forest, dark shadows she saw lurking among the trees, and the feeling of being watched by an invisible force. She gradually became fearful and obsessed, believing that this forest was cursed by a sinister spirit. The last page of the diary contained only a single trembling line. "I can't escape it. It's always beside me, waiting," and then abruptly ended. The whole group was silent, feeling a coldness spread through the air. Evelyn looked at the old photographs, one of them showing Alara, a woman with a sad face and melancholic eyes. Evelyn felt a strange sense of empathy for Alara, as if she could feel the fear and loneliness that this woman had experienced. The fourth night in the forest became more tense than ever. The whole group set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by tall and dense trees. They lit a large fire, hoping the light and warmth would help them feel safer. But fear still enveloped them, No one could truly relax. Every slightest sound in the forest made them jump in fright. Around midnight, when everyone was trying to sleep, they were startled by a terrifying scream that tore through the silent night. It was a high-pitched shriek, full of pain and horror. Evelyn's heart seemed to stop beating. She sat up from her sleeping bag, looking around in the darkness. Ben and David also quickly woke up. They hurriedly turned on their flashlights, trying to locate the direction of the scream. "What was that?" Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but it sounded terrifying," Ben replied, his eyes full of worry. Immediately after the scream, the whole forest seemed to come alive in a terrifying way. The sound of branches cracking echoed everywhere. The rustling of dry leaves like hundreds of feet rushing past, and other strange noises, the origins of which could not be determined, echoed in the darkness. Then, they heard that terrifying scream again. This time closer, clearer, as if someone was being brutally tortured right near their tents. The whole group was horrified. No one dared to utter a word. Evelyn felt a chilling gust of cold air rush over her. The hairs on her body stood on end. She felt a sinister presence very close to them, something invisible but incredibly terrifying. The next morning, the whole group woke up looking distraught and exhausted. No one had slept a wink all night. The area around their campsite was in disarray. Belongings were scattered everywhere. Some items were torn, as if a violent struggle had taken place. Ben checked around, but found no traces of humans or large animals. Only strange small footprints, unlike any creature he had ever seen. Determined to leave this haunted forest as quickly as possible, the whole group hurriedly packed their belongings, no one daring to linger for even a second. They walked non-stop, trying to find their way back to the main trail. Finally, after many hours of tiring and stressful walking, they managed to escape the Ho National Forest. Back home, Evelyn was no longer the strong and independent woman she once was. The horrifying experiences in the forest had left a deep psychological scar on her. She frequently had nightmares about the terrifying screams in the night, about the feeling of being watched and the sinister presence she had felt. She could never forget the extreme fear she had experienced. The others in the group were also significantly affected. They became cautious and less talkative. Evelyn never dared to venture alone into the deep forest again. The haunting memory of the Ho National Forest and the sinister things they had witnessed always clung to her, reminding her of the terrifying mysteries that still lie hidden deep within the wild forests of America. Whose terrifying scream was that? And what sinister spirit lurks in the Ho forest, waiting for its next victims? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true scary horror stories. I'm going to tell you a story. A story that even when I try to forget it, it still clings to me like a ghost. A fear that I can never escape. This happened in the summer of 2024, in a quaint little town called Willow Creek, nestled amidst the rolling hills of Vermont, USA. I am Chloe, a young illustrator who recently moved to Willow Creek, seeking new inspiration and a quiet space to escape work pressure. I was also in recovery from a prolonged period of depression, so I was particularly vulnerable to negative influences. The house I rented was an old two-story wooden house, built in the early 20th century, isolated on the outskirts of town, near an old railway track and a dense forest. Its exterior looked ordinary enough, just a little dilapidated, but the atmosphere inside always felt somber and cold, even though I tried to make it cozier with paintings and decorations. The smell of decaying wood, old dust, and sometimes, An indescribable scent, like rusted metal mixed with damp earth, always lingered in the air. I am by nature an introvert, enjoying quietude, and the sound of trains passing during the day brought me a sense of nostalgia and peace. Whenever I had free time, I would go out to the porch, watching the trains slowly glide by on the distant tracks. The long, echoing train whistle, the grinding sound of the wheels, all brought a comforting feeling. I liked the feeling of living near the tracks, as if an invisible thread connected me to the outside world, even though I didn't truly want to go out much. My first night here, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The wind whistled through the old window cracks. The dry branches tapped against the roof, and even strange rustling noises came from the old shed behind the house. I felt a vague unease, as if someone was lurking nearby. Sometimes a sudden cold gust of air would sweep through even though there was no breeze. I told myself it was just me getting used to the new environment. In the initial weeks, life in Willow Creek proceeded quite peacefully, but strange things in the house began to become more apparent, very subtly and difficult to explain. Sometimes, when I was drawing in my studio, I would hear very faint sounds, like whispers echoing from the hallway, right outside my door. I'd open the door to check, but there was only the dark hallway and a terrifying silence. The feeling of being watched clung to me. Small objects in the house also began to shift position inexplicably. The pencil I left on my drawing table. The next morning I'd find it on the floor. A sketchpad I had just left on the sofa. When I returned I'd find it on the kitchen counter. At first, I told myself I was just too forgetful, or perhaps my memory was failing. But the chill down my spine, as if someone was present, steadily increased. The unease peaked one evening, as I was sitting in the living room reading. Suddenly the room temperature plummeted, chilling me to the bone, even though the heater was on. I looked around, and saw a small window in the study had suddenly sprung open, even though I remembered closing it tightly. An icy blast of wind swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and old metal. I felt a dark shadow flit across the corner of my eye, like a blurry reflection in the window pane. I spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness. The feeling of being watched, as if someone was standing right behind me, never disappeared. Fear seeped into every cell, making it hard to breathe. One July evening, I couldn't sleep. The clock showed 2 a.m. The sky was pitch black, with only faint moonlight piercing through the clouds. I was tossing and turning in bed when suddenly, a strange sound came from the railway tracks. It wasn't the familiar train whistle, but a heavy grinding sound, like metal being worn down. Curious, I quickly put on my coat and went out to the porch. I looked towards the tracks, and the sight before me almost froze me solid. A train was slowly approaching, but it was incredibly strange. It looked very old, its wooden carriages pitch black, rusted, looking as if they were hundreds of years old. The most terrifying thing was that it had no headlights on, and only a flickering, weak blue light from inside the dusty windows. I told myself I must be hallucinating from lack of sleep, but the cold sensation running down my spine was too real. That train moved very slowly, heavily, and made no loud engine noise at all, only an eerie grinding sound of wheels on the tracks. It looked like a haunted train, a train of souls. As it glided past my house, I felt an icy coldness pierce me to the bone, as if there were hundreds of souls on board. I tried to reassure myself that it was just an old abandoned train, but the fear steadily grew. That old train slowly glided past my house, and I, frozen in astonishment and fear, couldn't tear my eyes away. I clearly saw every detail of it in the dim moonlight. The old, decaying carriages, with deep scratches and full of moss. As the last passenger car of the train passed by, I suddenly saw something terrifying. Through the dusty windows, I saw strange, pale human faces pressed tightly against the glass. They didn't move, just stood motionless, with deep-set and empty eyes, devoid of any life. They were the faces of men, women, and children, all pale, like corpses. They stared at me, unblinking, with a cold, haunting gaze. A young girl, with long, disheveled hair, her face full of suffering, slowly raised her pale hand, pressing it against the window pane, as if wanting to touch me. Her lips slightly moved, and I heard a very faint whisper, like the wind lamenting, echoing in my ear. "Save us?" Extreme horror surged within me. I backed away, stumbling onto the porch floor. My heart pounded as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I tried to scream, but my voice seemed stuck in my throat. I knew this wasn't a dream. This was real. I was witnessing something that didn't belong in this world. That ghost train continued to move, terrifyingly slowly, with the pale faces still pressed tightly against the windows, staring at me. I tried to crawl back inside the house, but their eyes seemed to be pulling me in, holding me in place. The faint whispers from the train grew clearer, echoing through the silent space of the late night. "Don't forget us?" The voice was cold, full of resentment, sending shivers down my spine. I felt an icy coldness radiating from the train, enveloping me, making my entire body numb. Then, as the last carriage disappeared behind the dense trees, the train suddenly accelerated terrifyingly. It gained speed incredibly fast, without any roaring engine sound, just a sudden rush into the darkness. In just an instant, the train sped away, and then, as it rounded the bend, it vanished. It didn't just move out of sight, but it literally dissolved into thin air, right before my eyes. No trace, no sound. Only dense darkness remained, the empty railway tracks and a terrifying silence. I lay curled up on the porch floor, trembling uncontrollably. Extreme fear erupted within me. I could feel invisible eyes still watching me from the darkness, from where the train had just dissolved. After that horrifying night, my life was completely turned upside down. I couldn't sleep peacefully. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of the pale faces pressed tightly against the windows of the last carriage. Their empty eyes and the whisper, "Save us." I started hearing the haunting train whistle echoing from afar at hours when no trains were supposed to run. The grinding of wheels as if the train was running right behind my house, especially at 2 a.m. The time the ghost train appeared, the feeling of being watched became more constant than ever. I felt as if an invisible pair of eyes was staring at me from the darkness, especially in the evening when I was alone in the house. The room temperature suddenly plummeted, chilling me to the bone. Objects in the house also began to shift more clearly. Doors automatically opening and closing, heavy footsteps in the attic. Strange dreams recurred. I saw myself standing on the Willow Creek platform again. The sky pitch black, and the ghost train slowly approached. The figures in the carriages became clearer. They waved, their faces pale, haggard, their eyes empty and pleading. And in the last passenger car, that long-haired woman, her face full of suffering, she reached out her pale hand, as if wanting to touch me, and whispered, "Don't go alone." The haunting of her grew steadily in my mind. The haunting of the ghost train and the long-haired woman in my dreams tormented me. I decided to delve deeper into the history of Willow Creek and the railway area near my house. I felt an invisible thread connecting me to what had happened. I went to the town library, sifting through old newspapers, and interviewing the oldest residents of Willow Creek. I discovered that in the late 19th century, a terrible tragedy had occurred right on the section of track near my house. A passenger train, on its way to a big city, had derailed due to an act of sabotage on the tracks, killing all passengers and crew. What was particularly strange was that the accident occurred at 2 a.m., and the bodies of many were never found completely. Among them, there was a family consisting of a mother and two small children, who were believed to have been in the last passenger car. The mother, named Eleanor, had long hair, and she was known to be a very loving mother. Oral traditions passed down through generations claimed that on quiet late nights, especially around the time of the accident, the ghost train would appear on that section of track, carrying the trapped souls, forever searching for escape and justice. They said that those who witnessed it, especially those who saw Eleanor's face, would be haunted forever, as she wanted to warn them of the danger and the trapped souls. I shivered as I read that information. Was Eleanor's spirit haunting me, and trying to tell me something? Extreme fear erupted within me. I knew that I had seen something I shouldn't have seen, and the trapped souls on that fateful train had chosen me. They followed me home, and they will never leave. I live in constant fear, unable to sleep peacefully, always staring into the darkness, waiting for the sound of a haunted train whistle, or a pale face to appear in the shadows. I escaped the train of death, but I'm not sure I escaped its haunting. The house in Willow Creek still stands there, silent in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. And the ghost train, I believe, still runs on those old tracks, forever searching for lost souls, or those lucky, or unlucky, enough to see it, to drag them into an eternal journey with no escape. This story is a warning. If you're ever in a small town near railway tracks, and on a quiet late night, you see an old train, without headlights, without sound, and especially, if you see terrifying pale faces in the last passenger car, never be curious, and never look directly at them. You never know, they might be waiting for you, and you will never return. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more terrifying ghost stories. I'm going to tell you a story, a terrifying experience that has been etched into my mind, making me feel lost in an ultimate fear every time night falls. A fear from which I can never escape. This happened in early 2023, in a remote small town called Blackwood, nestled deep within the tranquil mountains of Oregon, USA. I am Sarah, an art history researcher who recently moved to Blackwood, seeking a secluded place after the sudden death of my father. Grief and loneliness gnawed at me daily, making me more vulnerable than ever. The house I inherited from my father was an old wooden house, built in the 1940s. Located near the edge of town, nestled under ancient pine trees. Its exterior was quite ordinary, just a little dilapidated, but the atmosphere inside always had a somber, cold feel, even though I tried to make it cozier. The smell of decaying wood, old dust, and an indescribable scent, like rusted metal mixed with damp earth, always lingered in the air, especially on drizzly nights. The house was far from the main residential area, and the winding, tree-lined road leading to it made me feel isolated. I am an introverted person by nature, and this initially didn't bother me. However, the loneliness gradually turned into unease as night fell. The wind whistled through the old window cracks. Dry branches tapped against the roof, and strange rustling noises came from the old shed behind the house, all creating a solitary symphony of the night. I felt a vague unease, as if someone was lurking nearby. Sometimes a sudden cold gust of air would sweep through even though there was no breeze. My first night here, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls. The creaking of the floorboards upstairs, the faint groaning from the water pipes, all made me jump. I had a feeling that I wasn't alone in this house. A haunting sense of being watched clung to me. In the following days, I gradually adapted to the rhythm of life in Blackwood. But strange things began to creep into my life. Not just in the house, but also in the surrounding area. Sometimes, when I was reading in the living room, I would hear very faint sounds, like whispers echoing from the hallway, right outside my door. I'd open the door to check, but there was only the dark hallway and a terrifying silence. The feeling of being watched never left me. Objects in the house also began to shift position inexplicably. The coffee mug I left on the kitchen counter. The next morning I'd find it on the living room windowsill. A scarf I had just hung on the sofa. When I returned I'd find it on the floor. At first, I told myself I was just too stressed, or perhaps my memory was failing. But the chill down my spine, as if someone was present, steadily increased. The unease reached its peak one late evening. It was around 11 p.m. I was working on my computer, when suddenly the room temperature plummeted, chilling me to the bone, even though the heater was on. I looked around, and saw a small window in the study had suddenly sprung open, even though I remembered closing it tightly. An icy blast of wind swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and old metal. I felt a dark shadow flit across the corner of my eye, like a blurry reflection in the window pane. I spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness. I quickly closed the window tightly, but the feeling of being watched, as if someone was standing right behind me, never disappeared. Fear seeped into every cell, making it hard to breathe. One October evening, I had an urgent meeting in a nearby city. My car was almost out of gas, so I had to find a gas station on Interstate 101. It was a secluded road, winding through dense forests. The sky was pitch black, not a single star, and thick fog began to roll in. After nearly an hour of driving through the dense fog, I saw a flickering yellow light in the distance. It was an old, dilapidated gas station, standing isolated in the wilderness. The gas pumps were rusted, with corroded nozzles. The gas station sign was faded, with only a few flickering lights, casting long, distorted shadows. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was lucky to find this place. As I drove in, I saw an elderly, skinny man working there. He wore a faded uniform, his face haggard, his eyes deep-set. He seemed to be the only employee there. When I parked near the pump, he slowly approached. The faint light from the gas station canopy illuminated his face, making me shiver. He didn't say anything, just nodded and took the gas nozzle. I stepped out of the car, feeling a biting cold despite my thick jacket. The air here was thick with a musty smell, old gasoline, and an indescribable putrid odor. While the attendant was pumping gas, I turned to look around. Beyond the flickering lights of the gas station, everything was submerged in thick darkness. A few ancient pine trees stood tall behind the station, their gnarled branches reaching out like ghostly arms. The fog still lingered, shrouding everything in a blurry illusion. Suddenly, I felt an icy blast of air hit me, stronger than any wind. I shivered and looked towards the pine trees. And then, I saw it, right on a large pine branch, amidst the thick fog. I saw a ghost. It was the image of a woman, wearing an old white dress, her long hair covering most of her face. She was hovering in midair, not touching the ground, with dark, empty eyes staring straight at me. Her face was pale, bloodless, and her smile stretched from ear to ear, revealing black, rotten teeth. Extreme horror surged within me. I wanted to scream, to run away, but my feet were nailed to the ground. I could only stand there, trembling uncontrollably, and stare at that ghost. The attendant, he also looked up, towards the tree. His eyes showed no surprise, but instead a terrifying familiarity. The attendant, with his lifeless eyes, slowly turned to look at me. He whispered, his voice hoarse and cold, "She's always there." His words sent a colder shiver down my spine than seeing the ghost itself. It seemed he was accustomed to this presence. The ghost in the tree didn't disappear. She still hovered there, her dark, empty eyes fixed on me. I felt an icy chill pierce through my body, and a faint whisper, like the lamenting wind, echoed in my ear. Go now?" The voice was cold, full of resentment, making me shiver. Just then, the attendant finished pumping gas. He pulled out the nozzle, and a surprising sense of relief washed over me. I quickly fumbled for my wallet, handing him the money. My hands were shaking so much it was hard to hold. He didn't say anything, just took the money and turned to walk into the dimly lit convenience store. I quickly got into my car, locking the doors tightly. I looked back at the pine tree one last time. The ghost was still there, still staring at me. Her smile seemed wider, and her eyes seemed to emit an eerie glow in the darkness. I knew that I had seen something I shouldn't have seen, and this spirit had chosen me. With my heart pounding in my chest, I quickly started the car and sped away. I didn't dare to look back, didn't dare to look in the rearview mirror. I just wanted to get out of that place as fast as possible. After that horrifying night at the gas station, my life was completely turned upside down. The image of the ghost in the tree, along with the attendant's lifeless eyes, haunted me incessantly. I couldn't sleep peacefully. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face, those dark, empty eyes, and that chilling smile. I started hearing whispers from somewhere in the house, faint calls of my name, especially on quiet late nights. The feeling of being watched became more constant than ever. I felt as if an invisible pair of eyes was staring at me from the darkness, especially in the evening when I was alone in the house. The room temperature suddenly plummeted, chilling me to the bone. Objects in the house also began to shift more clearly. Doors automatically opening and closing, heavy footsteps in the attic. Strange dreams recurred. I saw myself standing at that desolate gas station again. The sky pitch black, and the ghost in the tree reappeared. She moved closer to me, extending her bony hand, as if wanting to touch me, and whispered, "This place is mine?" The haunting of her grew steadily in my mind, driving me almost insane. I tried to find out about the history of that gas station, but there wasn't much information. There were only a few local legends about a young woman who was brutally murdered nearby in the 1970s. And her body was found hanging from a tree, near an abandoned gas station. No one was ever convicted for the crime. The haunting of the ghost at the gas station and the long-haired woman in my dreams tormented me. I knew that I had seen something I shouldn't have seen, and this trapped spirit had chosen me. Perhaps, she wanted me to find the truth about her death, or simply wanted to unleash her resentment on me. I live in constant fear, unable to sleep peacefully, always staring into the darkness, waiting for a pale face to appear in the shadows, or an eerie whisper to echo. I escaped that gas station, but I'm not sure I escaped its haunting. The house in Blackwood still stands there, silent in the forest, but for me, every night is a battle. The gas station on that secluded road is still operating, with the old attendant and the ghost in the tree, forever waiting for unfortunate travelers to get lost at night. This story is a warning. If you ever drive on a deserted road at night, and you see an old, desolate gas station, with flickering lights and an attendant with lifeless eyes, never stop. And if you see a ghost in a tree, or hear whispers from the shadows, just drive away, never look back. You never know what's waiting for you there.